Hi there, I'm Clifford Bates, and welcome once again to Reading Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics. We are in Book 2, and today we're doing Chapter 3. So let's go right into it. In Book 2, we are dealing with the so-called ethical and moral virtues that he deals with, and he's been giving us an example of this. We dealt with the question of habituation in the early chapters, and now today we're going into the question of pleasure. We talked about discussion of what virtue is, and the role of it being a mean between excess and defect, right? Now we're going into chapter 3. Now, chapter 3, the pleasure or pain that accompanies someone's deeds ought to be taken as a sign of his characteristic. He who abstains from bodily pleasures and enjoys this very abstention is sophosune, moderate. But he who is vexed in doing so is licentious. So, in other words, if he's vexed by it, if he's troubled by it, he doesn't really like it. In other words, he is doing it and abstains from the bodily pleasure and enjoys this abstention. He is moderate. But then he is vexed by it in doing so is licentious. He who endures terrifying things and enjoys doing so, or at any rate not pained by it, is courageous. But he who is pained thereby is coward, right? This is what he meant. He starts getting into these things, right? But this is where I think he would undermine his own argument. Because he is not pained by it, enjoys doing it, or at least not pained, at any rate, not pained by it. I think there is some pain about it. In other words, the overcoming the fear is the issue of courage, right? But not pained by it is courageous. But he who is pained thereby is a coward, right? He's pained by doing it. It seems to be the argument. For ethical virtue, is concerned with pleasures and pain, right? This is the question. This ethicae is all about the question of pleasures and pain. It is on account of the pleasure involved that we do base things, and it is on account of the pain we we do no abstain beautiful things or noble kalos ones, right? Now this is this is an argument. He's asserting an argument here. Now I'm not sure to the degree he actually ultimately will uphold this view, because this assumes that if you have any, because this then doesn't make sense regarding the man who has no fear at all, right? The man who has no fear, doesn't has any fear, he does not see fear, has no fear, and doesn't feel pain about that. He's not courageous. It's the feeling of pain. So therefore, I think we have to look at what is being said here. It's kind of maybe a little more critically here. Okay, right? Thus, one must be brought up in a certain way straight from childhood, as Plato asserts, so as to enjoy as well as be pained by what one ought. For this is correct education. So, in other words, it's that you get habitual. In other words, the education of this is we're doing this that we no longer feel. In other words, we learn to it. In other words, the initial child is going to not yet be. But the thing about this is he's going to feel the pain. He's going to feel the pain, and he's not going to really want to do the good thing. He may do the correct thing. He might overcome the thing, but he still will have the fear, right? So what happens is we need to be habituated to this, right? This is why we need this. Further, if virtues are concerned with actions and passions, right? Actions, doings, and passions, right? And pleasure and pain accompany every passion and every action, then on this account too, virtue would be concerned with pleasure and pain. So therefore, not only this is that virtues are concerned with actions and passions, right? But every action and every passion is connected, accompanies with questions of pleasure and pain. So therefore, virtue too would be concerned with pleasure and pain. Punishment are indicative of this as well, since they arise through these pains, right? Punishment is we do this, we take these pains. They are uh, they are a sort of curative treatment, and curative treatments naturally take place through contraries. So therefore, if curative treatment is through contraries. In other words, correction. What do you call punishment here? And in other words, punishments. Punishments are a form of correction, and they are curative, a sort of curative treatment. They are sort of a curative treatment. Curative treatments tend to do contraries. How do you cure something? You correct it. In other words, they're corrections to something, and a curative is therefore through the opposite. We do, in other words, to over use pleasure to contrary pain, use pain to contrary pleasure. Right. Um, Further, as was said just recently too, every characteristic of soul shows its nature in relation to and in its concern for the sort of thing by which it naturally becomes worse or better. In other words, repeat this here. Let's get this understanding. In other words, um, as we said here too, every characteristic of soul shows its nature in relation to and concerns with the sort of thing that it naturally becomes a worse or better. It is through it is through pleasure and pain that people become base. By pursuing and avoiding these, either the pleasures and the pains that one ought not to pursue or avoid, or when one ought not, or as one ought not, or in many other such conditions as are defined by reason, logos. In other words, here in the argument ho logos, right? The phrase may be correct, may refer also to correct reason. In other words, but defined by argument in that sense, or by ho logos. And that also, the question is it referring to earlier this idea of orthologos also? But here is what is he saying here? That, in other words, it has naturally become worse or better, semicolon. It is through pleasures and pain that people become base. By pursuing and avoiding these, either the pleasures and pains that one ought not to pursue or avoid, or when one ought not, or as one ought not, or in as many other such conditions as are defined through reason, or the argument. Thus, people even define the virtues as a certain dispassionate and calm state. Even such a definition is not good. So, in other words, thus people even define virtue as a dispassionate and calm state. But this is not even good, for they say simply this much, but not as one ought, or as one ought not, when and any other thing posited in addition. In other words, this be by being passionate. In other words, the question is not that they're dispassionate and calm, but rather because it's not, this kind of definition is not good for they say simply this much are calm, not as one ought to, or as one ought not, or when, and any other things like this. Virtue, therefore, must be posited as being as such to produce the best action in relation to presence and pain, and vice as being the contrary. In other words, virtue is posited as being as much. In other words, is posited as being to be able to produce the best action in relation in its relation to pleasure and pain, responding to pleasure and pain, the best actions in response to both the pleasure and pain. And vice is not to produce the contrary actions, or the not correct actions, and again responding to pleasure and pain. But that virtue and vice are concerned with the same thing might become manifest to us also from these considerations. There being three objects of choice and three of avoidance: the noble, the advantageous, and the pleasant, together with their three contraries. the beautiful, right? The shameful. That could be also the base. The I think it's elogos. I think it's the agath kalos egg. So therefore, the beautiful, the kalos, the advantageous, and the pleasant. The contraries is the shameful, the harmful, and the painful. Right? The advantageous and the disadvantageous. The beneficial and the disadvantageous. And the pleasant and the painful. In all these, the good person is apt to be correct. The bad person is the error, but especially in regards to pleasure. For pleasure is common to the animals and intended upon all things done through choice, since both what is beautiful, noble, and what is advantageous appears pleasant, and they will have pleasance to this. So the question is that we have three things. We have the kalos, the noble or the beautiful, the advantageous, the beneficial, and the pleasant. Now, at one level, they should connect. In other words, if the pleasant and the noble, if the advantageous and the kalos, the noble, beautiful, are in agreement, and that, in other words, these things should be kind of in alignment with each other, and therefore that would be the argument. Now, when they're not in alignment, when the pleasure is done to shamefulness, or the shameful, then okay, then that should be avoided, right? Pleasure, but pain to this, you engage. Now, this is not. We should try to avoid this, okay? Too. Um, if to achieve this you have to have pain, then okay, that is in other words, and all of these, the good person is apt to be correct, and the bad person err, especially in regards to pleasure. For pleasure, as he says, this uh, animals and attentive things are done through choice, and since both what is noble, beautiful, and what is advantageous appears pleasant. Further, pleasure has pleasure has been a part of the upbringing of us all from infancy. It is difficult to remove this experience since our life has been so ingrained with it. So in other words, we can't avoid pleasure. The idea that life, that we have to go through life all through suffering. No, pleasure is, the good life is going to be pleasant to some degree. It's not going to be, if the good, remember what he said earlier about happiness, that the happiness life is going to be endured in suffering. Remember what he said about happiness all the way in the beginning of book one, that the good life is not going to be the life of misery and pain and grief. Uh, uh, if we're going to have pain, the pain cannot be, and the thing is not be something that's eternal and pleasant. That's a negative in that sense. So therefore, even here, he's kind of doing this, right? Where it's been with us. We also take pleasure in pain as the rule of our actions. Some of us to a greater degree, some lesser. So there was some of us rely on. In other words, we shouldn't be ruled by pleasure and pain. He's saying that some people of us are ruled by the question of pleasure and avoiding pain. In other words, we should be ruled by higher things, the advantageous and the noble. In other words, the noble, the advantageous, the kalos, the beautiful, noble, the advantageous, and the pleasant. There's a hierarchy here, right? And likewise with the things, we should not avoid. We should avoid at all costs uh, 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 shamefulness. Disadvantageous may be better than is this. In other words, this is worse. If this is best, this is worst. And the painful and the disadvantageous, that's the question. What is the hierarchy here? So this is the lowest. Is this the second lowest? And that's the third lowest in that sense? This is hierarchy in this question. So again, we also take pleasure and pain as the rule of our actions, some of us to a greater degree and some lesser. On account of this, then one's entire concern necessarily pertains to pleasure and pain. From taking delight in feeling pain makes no small contribution to our actions being well done or badly done. So therefore, there's going to be always something. When I do something, it's always going to have some element of pleasure and pain, and they're going to have. He says it's going to be makes no small contribution to whether our actions are being well or badly done. Further, it is more difficult to battle against pleasure than against spiritedness. In other words, pleasure. It's more difficult to battle against this than spiritedness, as Heraclitus asserts. In art and virtue, techne and arete always arise in connection with that which is more difficult. The doing of something well is better when it is more difficult. So if you're going to do something well, it's going to be more. It's going to be better when it's more difficult in that sense. Therefore, it's going to be something. In other words, if you're going to have to deal with something that is difficult, arts and virtue are connected with the things that are difficult. In that sense, the techne and virtue, in that sense, are going to be connected here in this sense. So what degree is techne is a kind of virtue, but it's a virtue of production, we'll see, where a virtue dealing with making of things, whereas virtue itself is the activity of action, right? In that sense, this is the concern that we have to do here. And the doing something well is better when it is difficult, right? As a result, and on account of this, the whole matter of concern in both virtue arete, and the politicae, in political art, is bound up with pleasures and pain. In other words, virtue and politics, the political art, politicae, are concerned with virtues and pain. For he who deals with these well will be good, but he who does so badly will be bad. So how do you deal with pleasure? In other words, pleasures and pain. If you don't deal with them well, then you will not. If you deal with them well, you'll be good. If you don't deal with them well, you deal with them badly, then you'll be bad, right? Let it be said then that virtue concerns pleasures and pain, that it both increases as the result of those actions from which it comes into being, and is destroyed when these are performed in a different manner, not difficult, in a different manner, and that is, and that it becomes active in just those activities as the result of which it also came into being. In other words, and in other words, let's do this, and that it becomes active in just those activities as a result of which it also came into being. So, in other words, this comes into being. The question of whether this thing comes into being is because of the action. I'm doing something, and something is being done, and therefore there is some kind of pleasure and pain because of the doing. The doing of something is where the pleasure and pain. This is where it came into being. The action itself is doing, right? It's doing for something. We're doing it for some reason. So therefore, the question is whether it comes into being and is destroyed when these are performed in a different manner. In other words, these actions themselves, the question is increased as a result of those actions from which it came into being. In other words, virtue, the virtue here is the type of action, the kind of action you're dealing with. What are you dealing with? You're trying to deal with. You're dealing with fear. You're dealing with pleasure. You're dealing with. You're dealing with. How you're dealing with other people, with money and things like this. What are you trying to do? Are you going to, and how you, and to the degree that you're trying to do it well, right? You're trying to do the best, right thing. This is what virtue does. And the pleasure and pain here is going to affect it. Now, this is more, we see pleasure and pain more clearly in the question of what we say moderation, sophosune, and courage. This is the most clear, because this is where the pleasure and pain also manifests itself more directly, because in many ways, fear is a kind of pain, and the overcoming of it is going to require more pain sometimes. Um, it's avoiding pain, right? The fear is I look at pain and I don't want to avoid it. I have to overcome it. I might have to suffer it in order to overcome it, right? Here, pleasure, too much pleasure, licentiousness, that all of a sudden I need to do what? I have to avoid that. I have to accept, not engage in pleasure in order to not become licentious. Here, I control my enjoying of pleasure. Not that I just don't enjoy pleasure at all, because I becomes insensitive. I become unfeeling, uncaring. So therefore, I have to avoid accept. The mean point is the correct point, as you said earlier. The mean point is the correct point, so therefore, excess and defect, and therefore the question of pleasure and pain. He really deals with these two virtues in the sense. So we'll stop here. If you have any questions, please put them below. I think that should be that good in that sense. If you've liked the video, hit the like button, share it, put it in your social media, send it to a friend. If you've not subscribed, please subscribe. We'd like to grow the channel some. Encourage if you know someone who might like the channel, tell them of the channel. Encourage them to subscribe also. If you didn't like what we did today and you think I just didn't like it, you can always hit the thumbs down button, dislike button, but then say why in the note so that we can learn, we can benefit from it. Again, this is the purpose of education, in that sense, benefiting from it. If you want to follow me in social media, you can follow me through my social media links are below. If you want to know more about me, my scholarship, and my research, and see check out my research on these things, you can find my academic social media below the social media sites, which gives access to my scholarship and things like that. And if you want to assist what I do here financially in some means, you can do so through a Patreon or Subscribe Star. The links are there. And then the other thing you can do is, if you want to you can buy one of my books, my 3 books that are listed below. You can do so through Amazon or any online bookstore, and or you can do it a normal bookstore. Well, that's it. And the last, no, you can. That's how you can help. Um, well, that's it. So we're going to finish next time with me. We'll look at book 4. So take care, and we will see you again later. Bye bye. Take care. Have a good day.